Hello and welcome to the Vedic Conversation, where each episode we take a different topic and look at it through the lens of storytelling and from the perspective of the Veda, an ancient but still very much relevant body of knowledge from India. I'm Rory Kinsella, a Vedic meditation teacher based in Sydney, and I'm joined by my Vedic colleagues Anthony Thompson in London and Derrick Yanford in New York. And this week we're talking about relationships, which is such a great topic as it touches on so many of the areas that we've discussed before on the podcast. Our relationship to anything, whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, or our relationship with things like money or success, is a reflection of our relationship with ourselves. And how do we develop our relationship with ourselves? You guessed it, meditation. So sit back and listen to our stories and conversation, and don't forget to stick around until the end, where we'll offer a practical exercise in how you can apply this knowledge to your daily life. And don't forget to give us a rating and a review if you've enjoyed the podcast.
Okay, so for me, I've always thought of relationship as a funny word in that what does it really mean? And what are we relating to? And there are so many different kinds of relationships, and they're often changing and evolving or dissolving and reappearing. And for me, I have many good friends, some that I've had since childhood, and others I've met as an adult in my career as a performing artist. And one of the things that I loved about being a dancer was the variety of relationships I would have in terms of auditioning, rehearsing, and performing. And I've often had the opportunity to share very intimate moments with many different people very quickly after meeting in this respect. And one of my good friends is a former dance partner of mine in a company that I performed with in the early 2000s. And although it might be years between the times that we see each other, when we do reconnect, it's as if no time has passed whatsoever. And it's relationships like these that I treasure the most. And I tend to think of myself as a person who values relationships probably more so than money, status, or recognition. And I have some friends that I'm very tight with and share a lot of inside jokes. And I've had a variety of student-teacher relationships with people I've taught over the course of about 30 years. And my romantic relationships have been long-term for the most part. And I've come to understand that each and every relationship, while they have striking similarities, are actually very, very different from each other. And as a real estate agent, I'd always been advised that although our industry is a transactional one, to always make sure to create and cultivate a relationship with your clients and customers rather than seeing them simply as a transaction. And I've definitely worked with and witnessed those who are purely in the relationship for the transaction of what they can get, whether that be love, money, security, and even the relief of boredom by establishing the relationship. And what I've noticed is that these types of relationships usually deteriorate or become toxic over time, as those involved are somehow looking for the other to bring them something they feel is missing, looking to be completed. And when I began exploring Vedic knowledge and beginning to understand the idea of relationships being a vehicle to express and export what we are, as opposed to the idea of what can I get from the other, my perspective and approach changed quite a bit. Knowing that no one or nothing can make us whole, happy, or satisfied, and that these qualities lies within us and not without. So now I bring to the relationship that which I desire to experience or feel is missing, rather than looking for it in another. And I think the biggest example of that for me is romantically, I like to cuddle. I like to be affectionate and that kind of intimacy. And mm, you know, it's something that I crave, and usually it's happening. It's always happening. But I have noticed I'm like, oh, I want to be hugged or I want to be cuddled, and it's not happening. And so instead of looking for that from my partner, I realized, okay, this is the moment for you to just go and be affectionate with your partner. You don't have to wait for them to come to you. If you want affection, engage in affection. You know what I mean? And so I'm always, every time I'm thinking to, okay, what can I change about the relationship? Something like I feel like I want something, instead of looking for it and trying to get it, trying to get my partner to give that to me, or, you know, a long time ago I used to drop hints a lot. Used to be very, vague. And now I'm just going, I'll just go and give exactly what it is that I'm looking for. And what ends up, and I have some really good friends who got married probably 10 or 15 years ago. And the thing that I used to hear them all say is, oh, my partner completes me. This is my other half. And I always felt like I don't think that way. I don't feel like I'm now complete because of the other person. I love having that other person in my life, but I feel whole, and now that I realize that I actually am, it's not that I feel whole, that I am whole. I enjoy my relationships in a completely different way because I'm not looking for something to happen where I used to be before. I know that the relationship is there for me to have whatever it is I want to happen, which is very, very different. And I even today, I just feel like, not that I don't need people, but like I went to the doctor and I haven't seen my doctor in a year. And the little bit of banter that we had back and forth about the election and our government and different countries was so delightful. And then the woman who came and took my blood, she wanted to know what my tattoo said, and I explained a little bit about her. And then we just like bursted out into laughter because she called me this little lovely young child, whatever it was. And now I find there are all of these relationships that I can have around me at all times that are really, really delightful. And just because we're having an exchange, I'm not looking to get anything from them. And that's, largely due to my meditation practice and the Vedic knowledge that, we've all been uncovering.
Lovely. I loved how you pulled out the non-romantic relationships part of that. It's, most of our relationships are non-romantic, so I think it's really important to bring that out, and that whole idea of you complete me, which was in my prepared story as well. It's just such a kind of classic, because it's that way that popular culture reinforces this idea, which is against what we're saying, that fulfillment's on the inside and you don't need someone else or something else to complete you. Popular culture tells us the opposite thing. The same as like material commercial culture tells us that we're not complete without buying a certain product or another one. So yeah, I love how how we find that in meditation, but also how it doesn't have to be romantic relationships. A lot of people listening to this might not be in a romantic relationship at the moment, but that doesn't matter. Like you say, it could be the nurse taking your blood, or the doctor, or the person you get coffee off. It's other consciousness. It's consciousness relating with consciousness, which is what we get in spades by meditating. It's removing content and having consciousness, meeting consciousness. But that's the whole, namaste thing. The light in me bows to the light in you, and that can be anything. That's in all people. And we could get even more hippie and say, that's in all things. Go and namaste some of the local cats and dogs. But yeah, I loved how you specifically brought out non-romantic relationships, because that's such a key part of as humans, we're very social, and we often discount all those other probably more often long-term relationships with friends, because they're not the one, or they're not that romantic relationship.
Yeah, I like the comment you made, Derrick, about an old friend that you've known for a very long time, and there are big gaps in your the frequency of meeting each other, but you just pick up from where you left off. It's as though the span of time is immaterial. And I have a friend like that too. And it's just, one doesn't have many friends who kind of fit into that category, but one relaxes because you've both been through so much over such a long period of time, and you recognize the changes, you witness the changes in the other person, and you share so much, not necessarily intimate things, but you're just very open, and you allow that exchange of emotions and connection to take place, and it's just fluid and effortless. And Rory, the point you make about the majority of relationships not being romantic, it's this connection with people that is so important. Now, obviously, some people are shy, can be shy or just not in the mood, but it's finding that unity point, the connection point with anybody, whether it's the person serving you coffee or you're in a shop and it's the person in the aisle next to you. Just a gesture, a look, a comment can turn what can be just a boring, inconsequential encounter into something a little bit better. And it's so easy to do, and it's effortless, and it is our natural inclination, I think. And I completely agree with you, Rory, that we are naturally disposed to being sociable. We don't want to go around up and down the street hugging everybody and saying hi. We get quite a lot of strange looks, but just being generally friendly and open. And I think as meditators, the joke we often have in the UK is that when you first start meditating, don't be surprised if people come up and keep asking you for directions all the time. Why me? Why did people keep? Because you're just giving out a vibration, which is one of openness, acceptance, availability. And I know a lot of people in their 50s who are single, either as a result of having had a long-term relationship or having come out of a long-term relationship, who have resigned themselves to being single. That they openly declare, well, I'll never have another relationship. I'm actually not even interested in having another relationship. And when you compassionately inquire what's going on, often the answer is, I'm not prepared to change. I am who I am. I like who I am. I like what I do. I like my life. And if anybody wants to join me, they've got to fit into me. And they've got to fit in with me. And actually, it's not even with me. They've got to fit in behind me, because I'm leading this, and there's not going to be any space for concessions. And then, the thought crosses my mind, well, no wonder you're single, because nobody's going to sign up to that, and it's this thing of in a sense, trading. There's a trade-off. And I've had 3 big relationships in my life. I'm in the 3rd big relationship of my life at the moment. And, what I have found is that if one is open to communication, at a very simple and profound level, then things are a lot easier. My father, it was the anniversary of his death yesterday, and he and my mother were married for 63 years. And I can honestly say that I never heard them have a crossword or a disagreement or an argument. This was a loving relationship. And all their friends and my relatives, they say the same. They never saw anything other than a very loving relationship. And on the 60th anniversary of their wedding, I asked my father, I said, at that time I was divorced, so there was no way I was going to get to 60 years on my own. So I said, well, how do you do? What is it? Tell me how you and my mother have done this. And he said, it's TLC, but it's not the TLC you think it is, tender loving care. It's tolerance, laughter, and communication. And of course, communication is the key, because with communication, it's not only transmitting, it's not only just talking. The more important part is the receiving, the listening, and listening accurately and with attention and compassionately and with understanding. You're trying to understand the other person. And when you're doing that, inevitably things become a lot easier. But if you're not prepared to listen, then you're always going to be butting heads. And I just thought that was just such a simple but profound thing, and it just kind of resonated with me.
It's so interesting hearing you talk about that with communication in that respect, because I was thinking about my friend in the company, and even in an audition situation, if I'm paired up with another dancer, usually a female, and as guys, a lot of our job is to partner them. What we have to establish very, very, very quickly is trust, especially if there's an overhead lift or whatnot. And in an audition situation, this is like the first time you're meeting somebody. They've made it this far. Now they want to see you do things together. You don't really have a lot of time to communicate verbally. You have to get the work and do it. But what I'm listening to is her body, the way that she plies, where her weight goes. And this is the first time we've ever done anything, and it's in front of a panel of people who are evaluating our skill set. And so you get to this place of trust very, very quickly. So it becomes intimate. You know what I mean? And this is a person I would have maybe never been in contact outside of this situation. And usually there's some kind of romantic element in there. The choreographer, the director, I've worked with a lot of choreographers who will tell you, like it or not, when you put a man and a woman or two people on stage, you're creating a relationship. You cannot escape it. And so what that relationship is about, usually there's some kind of, push, pull, connection or whatever. And you have to do this all within, 10 minutes. And I think that's one of the reasons that her and I are still bonded the way that we are, even though we don't see each other, is because we spent hours rehearsing and being on stage, almost pretending that we have this romantic relationship. It's real for us when we're on stage, but I don't feel that way about her. But, it's funny when I think back too, I'm like, yeah, there's been a couple shows where, I've had like romantic partners on stage and we don't really communicate verbally, but there's trust in there. And if I can't listen to them and they can't listen to me, I have had some partners where it's difficult because we can't seem to get on the same foot at the same time. But, the ones where it just, when it's effortless, when they trust you and you trust and you can find this commonality so quickly, those are the ones that are so beautiful.
That trust, I think, comes from that sort of open-heartedness that you have to go more than halfway. You have to step over the halfway mark and almost become vulnerable. And I thought vulnerability in relationships, I think, is something that people are often terrified of. That maybe even in same-sex relationships, there is the person who is, perhaps the dominant partner, or the person who is the leader and the other person is the follower or whatever it is. And sometimes that just naturally falls into place. I personally don't like that kind of a relationship. I like to be an equal, where all decisions are made together. And, I think that's a stronger, for me personally, that just kind of works better for me.
I had an interesting version of that one. I was going to bring up the point of surrendering preferences, which Anthony, you were kind of alluding to, this kind of key part of relationships where part of it is, not going, I'm going to get my way, I'm going to get my way, but saying, look, the strength of the relationship is bigger than me caring about what film we go and see or what we have for dinner. But then I guess a counterexample to that is my relationship at university. We were both kind of the non-dominant one, and it was really frustrating because we'd spend sometimes hours going, well, no, well, what do you want to do? Or what do you want to do? And it became to the point where I'd learned to express a preference, even if it wasn't natural to have one. I was just like, all right, we're going to have Italian just to get past the, because I think that the other key part of relationships is it's this often, you know, a complementary thing where it's more dominant persons with a less dominant person, or a more extrovert persons with a more introvert person, and then you get these, you know, you get two extroverts together and it's a madhouse. But then if you get two introverts together, it's kind of
I think happens.
yeah. So someone has to, I think someone has to then step into that role of just being more assertive. Otherwise, it becomes, you know, it can be really, really kind of comedy frustration.
Yeah.
But I was also interested with you know, talking about people you've been friends with for a long time, how you can just slot into that old relationship. So I've got maybe, you know, 25 friends from school who I'm still in regular contact with, but I've not lived in the same city as these people for 25 years. But even, you know, through technology, so we have a WhatsApp group. There's like 25 people on it, and most of them live very close together, and their kids all know each other, etc. But there'll still be hundreds of messages on this WhatsApp thing a day. And I think it's nice to talk about these kind of other ways of communicating, especially when multiple places are in lockdown at the moment, the UK going to lockdown in Europe, that it doesn't have to be anymore. It doesn't have to only be face-to-face contact. One of the great things about lockdown for me is that our family has now established this weekly Zoom catch-up. So every you know, Friday, it's 6 a.m. for me, it's 9 p.m. in England for my dad, and it's 4 p.m. in Boston for my sister. And we have this, and my other sister's in Paris, and so she's the night owl. But it's this weekly check-in, and we never did that before. We would, all living in different countries, we would, you know, catch up individually, or meet up for Christmas or whatever, but we didn't have this check-in. But, you know, the pandemic made it, you know, I guess it heightened things and made everyone more aware of these resources that we have. And, you know, another example is us three here. Like, I've never met Anthony in person, and we have this relationship. You know, you can create these meaningful relationships that don't rely on face-to-face contact. And I think that's been especially important here. I've had coaching clients who live in Melbourne, and Melbourne had a 4-month complete lockdown where they're only allowed out an hour a day, and there were lots of people there struggling with that lack of connection, because if you weren't in a relationship, you know, you would often go days without seeing people. So expanding relationships to non-romantic, but also expanding them to non-physical, physical location relationships. There's a lot of relating you can get done over, you know, the internet.
Yeah, I agree. I think this, you know, the pandemic has kind of opened up avenues of communication, like you were explaining, Rory, with your family, which sounds a really beautiful experience, especially as it's done weekly. But what I always find, it just kind of reminds me of something that in you know, in my art upbringing, when I was studying art, you know, on the screen, the lecturer would throw up an image of a picture, and that the image on the screen was always the same size. And it wasn't until you went to the museum and saw it, you think, oh my goodness, it's only this big, or it's huge. And it's like with you guys, I have no idea how tall you are. I have absolutely no idea, because I only ever see you from your chest up. I mean, for all I know, you're 8 foot tall. I haven't got a clue.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's this, it's a filtered experience. You know, it only goes so far. And of course, the other very, very important point about this kind of relationship, about the tech relationship, is that we're not picking up on things like body language and pheromones and all the other things that we're subliminally automatically picking up when we're engaged face to face. And you know, that's something that I think people have been missing, whether they've known it or not. It's the, when you know, Derrick, it's you going back to the physical touch. It's these things that you suddenly become aware of like this. It's okay, but it's not great. And why isn't it great? Because there are some really essential parts of me and the way I function and the way I have relationships that isn't able to take place.
Well, I would even go as far as to say I have a brand new relationship with my computer. I've never spent this much time in front of my screen. And I think that's probably true for a lot of different people. But I think what gets interesting about that too is like, yeah, we think about relationships with other people, but what about the relationships that we have with objects, inanimate things that either bring us pleasure, or with our pet, those kinds of relationships, like, I guess in some way I feel like I I don't know what I'm bringing to the relationship of me and my laptop, but I know that I'm getting a lot of stuff. But I mean, I have a couple items that are inanimate that I name. Especially my car. My car used to have a name, or an
Go on,
item
share.
of
Go on. What was the name? Come on, share. Go on. Don't be reticent. Come on, I want to know.
Vishnu.
No.
Come on, what was
Well,
the name?
it was more the name of the voice of the navigation system, and her name was
Oh, right.
Betty. I called her
Oh, yeah.
Betty.
Yeah. That's really interesting, because my navigation system is called Bettina. So,
Yeah.
No, that's
yeah, but I think you make a very interesting point about the relationship with the computer, which is what Giancarlo Patoka was talking about in our talk when he was our guest, talking about tech. And you made the very important point, Derrick, that it's a kind of one-way relationship, and we input a little bit, but boy, oh boy, do we get a lot out of it. And of course, we can manipulate what we get out of it, particularly what we get out of this. That we can tailor make it, we can finesse it so that we're getting the notifications that we want. We can get, in a sense, aroused, not sexily, but aroused by the things that we have curated. And I think that can become, we have to be very, very careful about this, because we don't want to transpose that kind of a relationship onto a human being, that we can then manipulate them and get what we want out of them.
Well, I think that also speaks to love-hate relationships. And I can't remember who made it this clear for me, but the idea of love-hate relationships simply meaning when you get what you want from the person or the thing, you love it. When you don't, you hate it. And so I'm back in New York City for the first time in about 6 months. And I've always had a love-hate relationship with New York. There's something about it that I love. It's unique. You cannot get this experience anywhere else on the planet. And yet there are things about it that drive me insane. And so, for example, like even to get tested for COVID-19, when I got tested in Florida, driving with the top down, you go, someone swaps your nasal, it's over in about 4 minutes. Here, I called 3 different places. I had to make an appointment. I signed my life away. I gave away my arm. There was this whole production to do the same thing. And it was interesting. I feel like I am experiencing the love hate dynamic that I have for the city simultaneously, because I haven't been here in a while. I'm like, I love it. And then it doesn't look anything like it did when I left. Like, places are boarded up. People, it's a very different place. And because of that, I think I'm more conscious now of when I'm experiencing that love-hate relationship with a person or something else. And all it really means is, oh, you're upset because there's something that you were wanting out of it that you're not getting. But when you are satisfied, you love it. You know what I mean? Which is a really interesting way of thinking about the relationship. Or, you know, I also, when we tell people we love them, I often really think of it really as what we mean more accurately is I actually love the way I feel, or I love what it is about me when I'm with you. And not to say that I don't love that person. Of course I do. But there's something energetically in that dynamic when our bodies physically come together that I get to experience about myself that I wouldn't when you're not here. The same idea of why I miss you. Now that you're not here, there's something about me I can't access. And when you're here, it lights me up, kind of a thing, too. You know what I mean? Which I wasn't really paying attention to. Where now, I can go, okay, I miss that thing, but I can almost live in the memory of it and go, it's not gone. It might be triggered by that other person, but how can I actually trigger it for myself? How can I replay and almost imagine that that person is here with me, which is very interesting as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that goes back to trust, that the person isn't with you, but you trust that the relationship is still whole, complete, functioning. And I think also you touched upon something, another very interesting point, which is, there are different ways to express affection and love. Some families are very touchy-feely, that they express their love through hugging and kissing and holding each other. And other families are brought up where that's not so commonplace, and that perhaps it's more through words or through action. There are some relationships where people never say I love you. You hear these conversations. You've never said you love me. Oh, but I give you all these presents. That's my expression of love. Or I hug you every time I see you. I hug you tight. That's my way of saying I love you. And I think, this is such an important point, because so many relationships come unstuck because the language of love, there are two different languages being spoken. And one's got to work that out pretty quickly. Otherwise, there are going to be some misunderstandings.
Yeah. Should we have another story?
Yes, please. Go for it.
Well, I sort of, I would have given a story, but I kind of feel I've given them all out. But I've shared my stories already. I know. I'll give you a story. Just recently, I live in a very lovely building. It's the old rectory, which for the church, which is opposite. It was built in about 1840, and the building's been converted into apartments. And just recently, we have had notification from a neighbor that they plan to do some extensive renovation work and building work, which is going to be hugely disruptive, particularly because most of the people in the building work from home. And so the idea of drilling and construction work going on outside our window is not particularly appealing. And the residents in the building, we're part of a company, we're a kind of residence company, limited company, for legal reasons, just to ensure that everything is kept watertight. And we have an amicable working relationship. And this particular instant, this kind of perceived threat, has kind of brought us together. And we recently had a Zoom meeting where we kind of came together, shared our feelings, and the dynamic of the relationship has changed for the better, because we have, if you like, an existential threat, or we have an external threat, and that's pulled us together. And we're fairly like-minded people, but we understand that by working together, we're going to get a better result than if we all go off and do our individual things. So kind of pulling together, perhaps making concessions, swallowing our pride, putting our ego to one side, suspending our preferences, but kind of going for the common good is going to have a very productive result. And it was just fascinating in this meeting watching the dynamic of the six of us. How, to begin with, there were some quite entrenched positions. And then as we all kind of just gently eased into it and started to sort of converse and share ideas, then the kind of defenses dropped and we all started to coalesce. And so we have a much better relationship as a group of strangers who happen to live in the same building. And that's obviously a sort of a non-romantic type of relationship, or a relationship that doesn't involve love. But I'm also thinking of when my kids were little, they all went to the same school. And they used to have a pottery class where they would make things. And when you were in this year, you would make a little plate. And when you were in the next year, you would make a little figure. And the next year, you'd make a jug or whatever it was. So you can imagine as the kids went through the school, it meant that if you were in this year, then this was the plate making year. And at the end of the academic year, in fact, it might have been at the end of every term, they came home with all the things that they had made. So it suddenly meant the house was like a sort of museum of pottery. We had all these different things. We had 3 different vases, we had 3 different plates, and so on and so forth. And it got to the point where we said, look, guys, these are amazing, but we just don't have space. And the danger is that we're going to break some things and you're going to be really upset. So I tell you what, why don't we choose one thing from each term? So in other words, you get 3 things to keep after every year. And the other things we'll take down to the charity shop, and then that will benefit other people. And just a weekend ago, my eldest daughter came to visit me, and she was talking with her boyfriend, and she was talking about, this, that, and the other. And I said, oh, look, and here is a plate that you made and gave to me as a present, when you were about 6. And it had an inscription on it, which I'm not going to tell you about, but it was very sweet, very cute. And that was a sort of physical expression of her love for me at that time. And this goes back to the point that you were making, Derrick, of, having a relationship with an object. She looked at it and said, Dad, but it's just a piece of rubbish. I said, it may be a piece of rubbish to you, but for me, this is so significant because you were just very cute at the time. You're very cute now, but you were very cute at the time when you gave it to me. And the way you gave it to me and, everything that went into it, that was your expression of your love for me. And so for me, that is, a very, very precious object. And so, these different expressions of love, I think, are fascinating. And these different types of relationships are fascinating.
Yeah, I love the idea of how we imbue objects with meaning. I was just thinking about my many guitars, which all have names, by the way.
Aha!
But also, I've tried to change my relationship with them because, like, I have this idea of I'm passionate about guitars at the moment. I have a tendency to buy another one, as my girlfriend chastises me for. But this year I've tried to change that desire. So when I have a desire to like browse guitars online, I'm now like, well, no, I actually want that connection with the musical instrument, which is a kind of meditative state where you're not thinking. It's like, a musical mantra. Your mind has something else to occupy itself with. So instead of browsing for guitars, I now practice, or I do an online lesson to give me more of a connection with what I actually love about the connection with music and playing music, rather than the kind of commercial expression of it. Because we have these kind of natural relationships of, say, with music, this abstracting of music kind of polluted by the commercial aspect of wanting to satisfy that by purchasing something. So that was a really interesting thing for me to go, no, when I have that desire, which is buy a guitar, that actually means no, just learn how to play your existing guitars more.
Do you think in the background there's a kind of a feeling that if you buy the new guitar, your music skills will improve?
Yeah, 100%. and they don't.
But my question is, do you have a favorite?
Oh,
are they within listening distance? Because they might get.
They can all hear you. I do, but it's weird. So I have a kind of one that I least like playing, but it's the one that has the most sentimental value because I've had it since 1993. And if I was to sell any of them in terms of how much I use it, it would be that one, but I can't because I've had it so long. It's like, it was my first one. But yeah, I might, tell my story at this point. So I guess, yeah, this is a bit of a different one. So I'm using this as a way, an example of a bad relationship, because it kind of touches on quite a few of the kind of things that have come up in other Vedic conversations, like, ego and things like that. So yeah, I think romantic relationships are such a prime example because they have such a significant place in our lives, and there's often no hiding from the other person who often lets you know exactly how you're doing. So I had this relationship about 10 years ago when I moved to Australia, and we'd been going out for a couple of years. But then as soon as we moved over here, kind of disaster struck, and she tried to break up with me. And there were kind of clear cracks in the relationship before that, but I guess we were hoping that this big move would somehow paper over them. But when it happened, I had a lot of kind of simultaneous reactions to her trying to break up with me. But one of the overriding ones was the potential embarrassment of it. My ego was so tied up in this relationship and our big move together that I didn't want it to be seen as this kind of spectacular failure. So I basically refused to let her break up. And we struggled on for a couple of more months before eventually, finding our own places to live. But I clearly wasn't still ready for it to end, as we ended up staying together on and off in this kind of weird, unofficial capacity for another 2 years. So it was longer than we'd even officially been together. And it was this kind of mostly comfortable purgatory, is what I'm calling it, where if I managed to successfully put my head in the sand and ignore the mess of the bigger picture, it was okay. And we kind of limped on this way, but it came harder and harder to ignore this white elephant in the room, that we didn't have a future. But then we finally broke up 2 years later, and then discovered that the universe has this kind of perverse sense of humor, because the very same month that we broke up, the two companies that we worked for, because we work in the same industry, they decided to merge. So there we were,
Wow.
working in the same office every day, having these awkward run-ins in the lift and being at these work events, and
Wow.
everyone else found it hilarious. But I guess picking up on what you were saying earlier, Derrick, in the Vedic understanding, the only place that we find fulfillment is on the inside. And relationships are our chance to share that fulfillment that we find on the inside with others. But as we were saying, the Vedic understanding isn't the common understanding. We have this idea that there's a soulmate out there for us to find, and somehow they complete us. And that Jerry Maguire famous line, you complete me, suggesting that we're somehow incomplete on our own. But, this is a dangerous situation to be in, because the more that we rely on the outside world to fulfill us and complete us, the more likely we are to be disappointed. And for me, my ego was so tied up in this relationship, like it had been at the time, in other things like my job title or how well my band at the time was doing. And it meant that my self-esteem was tied up in how the relationship was going. As usual, I'd be on this roller coaster of fate. But the benefit of meditation is, as we all know, is that we connect with this place of fulfillment inside at our stillest, innermost point, just by simply thinking our mantras or playing music or whatever way that we connect with this deepest part of ourselves. And this reminds us that we have this place of fulfillment there whenever we close our eyes, and it means that we're not so needy and we're not trying to find it in other people. And it means, that the more we meditate, the more we're able to export that. And I think, looping back to what you were saying at the beginning, Derrick, it completely changes everything when you're not looking to kind of like a vampire take that stuff from other people. You're a net exporter, or you're at least not needing other people to provide that. But yeah, that was my comedy relationship.
I have a question though about what you said. So was it your girlfriend's idea to move from the UK to Australia?
It was, yeah. So she was
And
probably escaping, and I just didn't take the
and was
hint.
she British or was she Australian?
British.
Okay. Interesting. Because I feel like I know somebody else too. They're from Scotland and had a girlfriend who was hell bent on moving to Australia. They really didn't want to do it. He ended up doing it, and like as soon as they got there, she was like, "No," or she didn't even end up coming. They traveled separately, and she changed her mind. So here he was in Australia by himself, no girlfriend.
That's an
So,
adventure.
like another thing about emigrating is because people think things will be different, because often they're trying to escape their relationship with themselves or some long-standing relationship they have with the world around them. Maybe that's with work or with relationships in general, or with an addiction perhaps. And they think that by transplanting themselves to a different geographical location, that will somehow fix things. But it's, by changing your geographical location, you're not changing much, really. And if you
You made
don't
that
do,
very interesting. Sorry, Rory, go ahead.
if you don't do that inner work, you're not going to, be able to change it by those outward signals.
I think the exact same thing is true with, couples who decide to have a child, thinking that their romance is kind of fading. If we bring a child into the mix, that will kind of rekindle it or strengthen our bond, which I think a lot of times really exposes it's okay, have a kid. It's not the kid. It's not money. It's the two of you really are probably better apart than together. And it's interesting how that, what we do to try to either trick ourselves or convince ourselves that we should stay when it's actually time to go. You know what I mean? And I know for myself, I've definitely confused longevity with success. I might have wanted to get out of a relationship, but maybe stayed in it because we're approaching a milestone or whatnot. Or the longer you're in a relationship or you've been doing something, people often equate that with success. So, what's your secret? When the reality is, you can be in a very unhappy relationship for a long time. Length of time doesn't really equate to anything more than length of time. I mean, it can be an indication of a great relationship, but that's the thing that gets exposed is why are you in the relationship? And because some people are in a relationship because they don't want to be alone. They don't want to be the relationship that they have with themselves is scary. There's this other person for distraction or whatever. So it becomes really, I think the older we all get, and the more practice or the more experience we have with relationships, you start to recognize the things you just couldn't see. Whether that means when you're in love too, right? You're overwhelmed with love and you overlook all of the red flags and all of the things that your partner is trying to tell you that might not be working. You're just like, oh, you don't pay attention. And then you get through the love part and you get through and then it's like, how did you not see these things? Or both people want a particular thing, a particular relationship that they've imagined, and so they start to act as though they start to participate as these team members. Then it gets real. They move in, they let their hair down, and they do all of these things that they would have never done before because they didn't think their partner would have found that attractive, and now they're doing it all the time. And you're like, who are you? I don't know who this person is at all. And it's interesting, even like with the guitar that you said that it doesn't make the best music, but it has the most sentiment. You're not willing to part with it, even though it might not deliver what you're expecting. I think this is what makes relationships so interesting for humans.
Yeah, what you're talking about, Derrick, resonates with me particularly because I was married for 27 years, and the last 10 years of that marriage or that relationship were increasingly unhappy. The cost of ending the relationship kept me, it outweighed the benefits of leaving. And so, I was constantly thinking, the kids are too young, what's the impact on their lives going to be, socially, all the other things that kind of come into play, until there comes a point where it is absolutely no longer sustainable. And the only, for me, as I've shared with you guys, is that, it comes to the point where you are actually being fundamentally dishonest in many different areas. First of all, you're being dishonest with yourself because you're deceiving yourself and pretending everything is okay when it isn't. And you're also being dishonest with the other person, pretending it's okay, or we'll muddle through this, or it's just a phase that we're going through. And you're also pretending and deceiving the outside world that everything is okay. People look in, as you were saying, Derrick, with the long-term relationship. You're so successful. How does it happen? I remember, some friends of mine who, were very successfully married. They had an extraordinary lifestyle. It was absolutely wonderful. And when they announced that they were getting divorced, it was like, what? They were the last people I could ever imagine taking that step. They seemed to be so together. But it was the red flags at the beginning of the relationship. It's the white elephants that you were talking about, Rory, where there are these things which, as you say, Derrick, you're just ignoring because in that wild, heady, intoxicating first steps of love, you think, oh, well, that we'll get over that. But unless you actually acknowledge those things and discuss them right at the beginning, they're going to be the things that come back and bite you later.
Okay, thanks for sticking around until the end. Each episode we offer a takeaway of an exercise you can do at home to start applying this knowledge to your own life. In this episode we were talking about relationships and how when we look for and find fulfillment on the inside rather than seeking it in other people and things, we're on much more stable ground. So this week we invite you to take stock of the relationships in your life and examine whether you're expecting them to fulfill you or whether instead they are chances to share the fulfillment you already have inside. So take some time to sit and quietly reflect or write your thoughts in a journal. And if you're happy to share your stories, we'd love for you to join the conversation. So please send them through to us at stories@thevediconversation.com or post them on social media with the hashtag #TheVedicConversation, and we'll share some in future episodes. And don't forget to give us a rating and review, and please share this with your followers. See you next time.